Wontae did not return to the party for 11 minutes. Jacaira counted every one of them, standing at the edge of the lawn with Yell's hand still curled trustingly in hers, watching the corner of the house where his father had disappeared. "He does this sometimes," Yell said, matter of fact, tugging her hand gently toward the dessert table as though 11 minutes were nothing at all. "Grown-up stuff. It's boring. Come on, they're about to light the candles." Jacaira let herself be pulled, though her eyes kept drifting back toward that corner of the house. When Wontae finally reappeared, his expression had settled back into something composed, but not quite. Not to someone who'd spent the last month learning the particular geography of his face. There was a tightness at his jaw that hadn't been there before, a stillness in his shoulders that looked less like calm and more like control. "Everything all right?" she asked, once he'd reached her. Once Yell had run ahead toward the dragon cake with a gaggle of other children. "Everything's fine." He said it too quickly. Then, catching himself softer, "It will be. Later. Not today." Jacaira studied him a moment longer, then let it go. The same instinct that had served her well the night they met. Some doors open faster when you stop pushing. She didn't know yet that behind that corner of the house, an older man in a charcoal overcoat had stood very close to Wontae and said, quietly, without raising his voice once, "The board is asking questions, Wontae. About the American woman. About whether you understand what kind of message this sends." She didn't know Wontae had answered just as quietly, "I understand exactly what message it sends," and meant it as something closer to a vow than a concession. Welcome to Black Silk Stories, the home of Afro-Korean stories that hit different. Subscribe, drop a comment, and not go anywhere. This is only the beginning. The board member's name was Suk-jin Bae, and he had known Wontae's father before Wontae had known himself. He found Wontae again 3 days after the birthday party, in the dim wood-paneled study of the Shin estate. "You look well," Suk-jin said, settling into the chair across from Wontae's desk without being asked. He wore a dark gray overcoat, unbuttoned, the kind of unremarkable elegance that men of real influence favored over anything flashier. "Happier than I've seen you in years, if I'm honest. You didn't come here to compliment my mood." "No." Suk-jin's smile faded into something more careful. "I came because people are talking Wontae. A woman like that, American public, a company with her face on every business page in the country. She is not built for a life like ours. She cannot be. Not without cost." "Cost to whom?" "To you. To the boy." Suk-jin leaned forward slightly. "You've kept this family's business invisible to him his whole life. One headline, one photographer outside the wrong restaurant, and that ends. Is that a price you're prepared to pay for a woman you've known a month?" Wontae's hand stayed perfectly still on the desk, though something in his chest had gone tight and cold. "I've paid every price this life has ever asked of me," he said, low and even. "I buried my wife without letting the world see me grieve her. I have spent 4 years making sure my son believes his father sells buildings and shakes hands for a living. I know exactly what this life costs, Suk-jin. Better than you do. Then you understand why I'm asking you to end it. Quietly. Before it costs you something you can't buy back." Wontae was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. Suk-jin's eyebrows lifted just slightly. "I built walls around that boy so thick he's never once had to be afraid," Wontae continued. "I am not going to be the one who teaches him that love is something you end quietly, before it costs too much. He deserves better than the lesson I nearly taught myself." Suk-jin studied him for a long moment, something unreadable behind his eyes. Not quite anger, closer to the particular disappointment of a man watching someone choose a harder, less predictable road. "Your father would have ended it before dessert was served," he said, rising from his chair. "My father," Wontae said quietly, "never once saw his son smile at his own dinner table. I have. Twice this month. I'm not giving that up because it's inconvenient for the board." Suk-jin left without another word. Wontae sat alone in the study for a long time afterward, the silence settling around him the way it always had. Except this time, for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the only company he had. He didn't tell Jacaira about the conversation. Not that week, not the next. Instead, he called her the following evening, voice steadier than it had been at the party. "I owe you an apology," he said, For disappearing at Yell's party. You don't owe me anything. You run a business. Businesses have moments. She was in her office, late again, city lights spread gold beneath her window, the drawing from that first dinner still tucked into the corner of her desk where she'd propped it, half forgotten, half not. It wasn't the business, Wontae admitted. It was someone reminding me that some people don't think you belong in my life. Jasaira went very still, phone pressed close. And what do you think? A pause, not hesitation she'd learn later, but the particular silence of a man choosing his next words with real care. I think, Wontae said, that for the first time since my wife died I looked forward to a Tuesday. Because I knew I'd get to see you. A breath. I don't care what the board thinks belongs in my life, Jasaira. I care what makes it worth living. She closed her eyes, phone warm against her ear. The city humming faintly beyond the glass. That's a very dangerous thing to say to a woman who's spent her whole life pushing people out before they can leave first, she said quietly. Then I hope you'll let me be the exception, Wontae said. I've had a lot of practice being patient. I told you that once, remember? Ask anyone who's ever tried to rush a deal with me. Jasaira laughed, soft and surprised, the sound loosening something tight in her chest that had been coiled there for years. Dinner Friday, she said. Bring Yul. He'll want to know if I've been keeping up with the dragon cake reviews. He's already drafted a list of follow-up questions, Wontae said, and she could hear the smile in his voice, unguarded, real. Fair warning. He takes his research seriously. So do I, Jasaira said. I look forward to the interview. By late autumn, Jasaira had learned the particular rhythm of Wontae Shin's household the way she'd once learned quarterly earnings reports, thoroughly, and without meaning to. She knew Yul liked his cereal dry, no milk. Because milk makes it sad. She knew Wontae read the same 3 pages of the newspaper every morning before touching his coffee, out of habit rather than interest. She knew the housekeeper, Mrs. On, hummed old songs while she worked and had decided, within a week of Jasaira's first visit, that she approved. What she hadn't expected was how easily she'd be folded into all of it. You're coming to pick up today, Yul informed her over the phone one Wednesday afternoon, with the particular confidence of a 7-year-old who considered the matter already settled. Daddy has a meeting. I told my teacher you'd be there. You told your teacher. Miss Park asked who was picking me up. I said Jasaira. A pause, thoughtful. She asked if you were my mom. I said not yet. Jasaira sat very still in her office chair. Phone pressed to her ear. Something warm and terrifying blooming in her chest all at once. Yul. What? I'm just answering questions. He said it so simply, so without weight, that she couldn't even find the words to correct him. Are you coming or not? I'm coming, she said, already reaching for her coat. A soft camel-toned wool wrap, tailored and structured. The kind of outfit that read powerful without trying. Her raven waves pinned loosely back for the school run. Tell Ms. Park I'll be there by 3. She arrived at 2:58, and found Yul waiting at the gate in a small gray blazer over a crisp collared shirt, backpack slung over one shoulder, scanning the pickup line with the seriousness of a man awaiting a business partner. He spotted her and broke into a run. You came early, he announced, delighted, as though early arrival were the highest form of loyalty a person could offer. I did. She crouched to his level, adjusting his collar out of habit now, a small gesture that had become theirs without either of them naming it. How was school? Boring. Except we did dragons in art class. I told everyone I know a real dragon cake recipe. Do you? No, Yul admitted. But nobody checked. Jasaira laughed, the sound easy now, unguarded in a way it rarely was in boardrooms. She took his offered hand, and they walked together toward the car, Yul narrating the entire school day in exhaustive, meandering detail. A substitute teacher, a lost mitten, a classmate named Daniel who claimed to have met a real ninja. While Jasaira listened to every word like it mattered, because somehow impossibly it had started to. Wontae found them both in the kitchen that evening, Jasaira in flour to her elbows, Yul standing on a step stool beside her, both of them laughing over what was meant to be dumplings and had become, somewhere along the way, a small culinary disaster. He stood in the doorway a long moment without announcing himself, still in his charcoal work suit, tie loosened, watching them with an expression he didn't often let anyone see, not even Jasaira, not yet. I leave for one meeting, he said finally. And come home to a crime scene. Daddy. Yul held up a dumpling that bore no resemblance to a dumpling. Jasaira says it's the thought that counts. Jasaira is being generous, Wontae said, crossing the kitchen, shrugging out of his jacket, rolling his sleeves as he came. Jasaira should know I have very high standards for dumplings. Then you're welcome to show us how it's done, Jasaira said, arching a brow, flower still on her cheek. Instead of standing there judging. He did. And for the next hour, the three of them stood shoulder to shoulder at the counter. Wontae's sleeves rolled to his forearms, Yul standing on his step-stool between them, Jasaira laughing every time Wontae corrected her technique with the exact same patient precision he used for everything else in his life. And none of them mentioned the board or the pressure, or the 11 minutes at the birthday party that Wontae still hadn't fully explained. It didn't feel necessary. Not tonight. The months moved like that, quietly, in small accumulated moments rather than grand gestures. There was the Saturday Jasaira taught Yul to ride a bike in the estate's long gravel drive. Wontae watching from the porch in a soft gray knit sweater, trying and failing to hide how much the sight of it undid him. There was the evening Yul fell asleep against Jasaira's shoulder during a movie neither adult had actually been watching, and Wontae carried him to bed, then returned to find Jasaira still sitting exactly where he'd left her, and didn't say anything, just sat back down beside her, closer than before. There was the afternoon Yul asked her, entirely without warning mid-bite of an ice cream cone. Are you going to marry my daddy? And Jasaira nearly choked and Wontae, walking a few steps ahead, turned around slowly with an expression that suggested he very much wanted to hear her answer too. That's between me and your daddy, Jasaira said finally recovering. So yes, Yul said satisfied and went back to his ice cream as though the matter were settled. Wontae caught her eye over his son's head, something unspoken and warm passing between them. Not confirmation, not yet, but no longer a denial either. Still, there were nights Wontae grew quiet without explanation. Nights his phone buzzed with numbers he didn't recognize, and he'd step out onto the balcony to take the call, returning minutes later with his jaw set in a way Jasaira had learned meant not tonight, but soon. She didn't push. She'd promised herself she wouldn't, the same way she hadn't pushed that first dinner. But she noticed. She always noticed. You disappear sometimes, she said one evening, the two of them alone on the terrace after Yul had gone to bed, city lights scattered below the hillside like something spilled and glittering. She wore a deep plum evening dress, fitted and elegant, a birthday dinner they'd celebrated quietly, just the two of them hours earlier. Not physically. Somewhere behind your eyes. Wontae was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass of water slowly, that same old habit still unbroken. There are things about my life I haven't told you, he said finally. Not because I don't trust you, because once I say them I can't take them back. And some part of me is afraid of what happens after. Jasaira reached over, covering his hand with hers, stilling the glass. Wontae, she said quietly, I've watched you build an entire world just to keep your son soft in a life that could have hardened him. Whatever you're carrying, I don't think it's going to change what I already know about who you are. He looked at her for a long moment, something breaking open behind his composed expression. Gratitude and fear tangled together. Soon, he said. I promise you. Soon I'll tell you everything. Soon arrived on a Thursday evening in early winter, in the quiet of Wontae's study, the same room where Sukjin Bey had once sat across from him and asked him to give her up. Jasaira had never been inside it before. Wontae had kept it separate, she realized now, the way he kept certain rooms of himself separate. Not locked exactly, just unvisited, waiting for the right moment to open the door. Yul was asleep down the hall. The house had gone still around them, the particular hush of a home at rest, nothing but the low crackle of the fireplace and the soft clink of ice-free water in two glasses. Jasaira wore a deep burgundy silk blouse tucked into tailored black trousers, understated but sharp, the kind of outfit she chose when she wanted to feel steady rather than dressed up. She'd sensed, somehow without being told, that tonight called for steadiness more than elegance. Wontae had changed out of his suit into a simple charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed to his forearms, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked less like a man carrying the weight of a name and more like a man about to set something down. I need you to understand something before I say the rest, he began, seated across from her, hands loosely clasped. This life wasn't a choice I made. It was one I inherited. My father built it out of necessity, in a world that didn't leave men like him many doors to walk through. I was 26 when it became mine. I didn't ask for it. I have spent every year since trying to run it in a way my father never could, quieter, cleaner, further from the things that cost him everything soft in himself. What does run it mean exactly? Jasaira asked gently, not accusatory, genuinely asking. Influence, Wontae said carefully. Leverage. Protection for people who need it and can't get it anywhere else in exchange for loyalty. Business arrangements the law doesn't always smile on, though I've built mine to avoid the worst of what that world can become. I don't deal in anything that puts innocent people in harm's way. That was the line I drew for myself the day Yul was born, and I have never crossed it. He met her eyes steady despite everything. But it is still a world of power that isn't always earned cleanly. I won't pretend otherwise to you. Not tonight. Jasaira sat with that for a long moment, turning her glass slowly, an old mirrored habit she hadn't noticed she'd picked up from him. Is Yul safe? She asked finally, the only question in the end that truly mattered to her. Yul is the safest person in this city, Wontae said without hesitation. Everything I do, every wall I've built, exists to keep it that way. He will never carry what I carry. That was the promise I made the day his mother died. And it is the only promise in my life I have never once broken. Jasaira was quiet for a long time. Wontae watched her, jaw tight, bracing. She could see it, the particular stillness of a man who had already rehearsed how this conversation might end, who had perhaps expected this moment for months and dreaded it in equal measure. Thank you, she said finally, for trusting me with that. His shoulders dropped just slightly, some tension releasing that he'd likely been holding since the night of the birthday party. That's it, he said quietly. No questions? I have questions, Jasaira admitted. 100 of them. I'll probably have more tomorrow and more after that. But Wontae, she reached across the space between them, taking his hand properly this time, no longer just stilling a glass. I didn't fall for the version of you the headlines would write. I fell for the man who reads the same 3 pages of newspaper every morning out of habit, who taught his son to fold napkins into something better than what he was handed, who built an entire second life just so a 7-year-old could believe love was safe. Her voice caught just slightly. That man is still sitting in front of me. Nothing you just told me changes that. Wontae exhaled, something breaking loose in his chest that had been held there for years, since his father's funeral, since his wife's illness, since the moment he'd first understood that the life he'd inherited meant he would likely die alone in it, armored, unreachable. I was so afraid, he admitted quietly, that telling you the truth would be the thing that finally made you leave. Everyone I've ever let close enough to know all of it has either left or been taken from me. I'm not everyone, Jasaira said. I've spent my whole life being the one who leaves first, Wontae. I know exactly what that looks like from the inside. I'm not doing it to you. I'm done running before things get real. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, the way he had that first night at the restaurant, except without the caution now, without the fortress walls half raised between them. Then stay, he said quietly. Not just tonight. I mean stay. In this. In whatever this is becoming. I'm already staying, Jasaira said. I have been for months. You're only just now catching up. He laughed, a real laugh, low and unguarded, the sound filling the study in a way it hadn't in years, and crossed the space between them, and for the first time since the night his son had handed a stranger a folded napkin and changed both their lives without meaning to, Wontae Shin felt relief. Down the hall, unseen by either of them, a small figure in dinosaur pajamas stood just outside his bedroom door, having woken for water and wandered toward the light beneath the study door instead. Yul watched for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to understand, in the particular clear-eyed way children understand things adults spend years overcomplicating, and then padded quietly back to bed, a satisfied smile on his face, already composing in his head exactly how he would take credit for this in the morning. The proposal when it came was smaller than either of them expected. No grand gesture, no orchestrated surprise, just a quiet Sunday morning in the estate's garden, frost still silvering the grass, Yul between them in a thick wool coat, supposedly helping test a ring Wontae claimed he'd bought for research purposes. It's not for research, Yul informed Jasaira solemnly. entirely unable to keep the secret he'd clearly been entrusted with for at least a week. Daddy's been practicing what to say for 4 days. He said it in the mirror. I heard him. Yo. What? I'm just saying. Wontae, kneeling in the frosted grass in a simple dark green wool coat, no, he'd caught himself before choosing that shade, had swapped it that morning for a deep navy one instead, some instinct telling him green wasn't the color for this particular morning, looked up at Jacaira with an expression that made every rehearsed line disappear from his head entirely. I had a speech, he admitted. I've genuinely forgotten every word of it. Say the true parts, Jacaira said, laughing, tears already gathering unbidden at the corners of her eyes. The true part, Wontae said slowly, is that I built an entire life to keep everyone out, and somehow a 7-year-old and a folded napkin let you straight through the front gate before I even understood what was happening. I don't want to build walls anymore, Jacaira. I want to build a family. With you. If you'll have both of us. Say yes, Yell stage whispered, tugging her sleeve. Say yes, say yes, say. Yes, Jacaira said, laughing through the tears now, pulling them both into her arms at once, the ring forgotten entirely on the frosted grass for a full minute before Wontae finally remembered to put it on her hand. The wedding took place in early spring, in the same hillside garden where Yell had once led Jacaira across the lawn to meet his father for the first time. String lights threaded through blooming trees now instead of bare branches, soft ivory drapery framing a small arch beneath which perhaps 60 guests gathered, intimate rather than grand, exactly the way Jacaira had asked for it. She wore a fitted, elegant gown in soft champagne silk, structured at the bodice, flowing simply from the waist. No excess, no spectacle, just quiet, unmistakable power in every line of it. Her raven waves were swept partly back, soft curls framing her face, a single delicate hairpiece catching the afternoon light. She had chosen deliberately not to disappear into white lace and tradition, but to look still entirely like herself, only softer, only surer. Wontae wore a deep navy-tailored suit, precise as ever, a single sprig of white blossom pinned where the silver lapel pin had once sat the night they met, a quiet echo deliberate of that first dinner. He stood at the arch with a composure that nearly held, until the doors opened and he saw her, and every carefully practiced stillness in him dissolved at once. Yull walked ahead of her down the aisle, ring-bearer and self-appointed architect of the entire event, dressed in a small tailored suit of deep navy to match his father's, a white blossom pinned neatly at his own lapel, carrying the small velvet cushion with both hands like it held the most important cargo in the world. He reached his father first, turned, and instead of taking his place quietly at the front as rehearsed, reached up and took Wontae's hand, holding it firmly as though steadying him. "You're shaking, Daddy," he whispered, not quietly enough. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the guests. Wontae, eyes bright, didn't even try to deny it. "Do you, Wontae, take this woman?" He didn't wait for the officiant to finish. "I do," he said, low and certain, drawing another ripple of laughter, though his eyes never once left Jacaira's face. "And do you, Jacaira?" "I do," she said, before the question had even fully formed, and the garden erupted. Soft applause, Yull cheering loudest of anyone, Yoon somewhere in the second row dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd sworn that morning she wouldn't need. They kissed beneath the arch, spring light falling warm and gold across the garden, and for one suspended moment, neither of them was a billionaire or a boss, a headline or a name spoken carefully in lowered voices. Just two people who had spent years building fortresses, standing together now in the open, unguarded, entirely without walls. At the reception, beneath the same string lights that had once framed a 7-year-old's birthday party, Jacaira found Yull sitting alone at the edge of the dance floor, watching the guests with the particular satisfaction of a boy surveying a plan finally fully executed. She sat beside him, careful of her gown, and bumped his shoulder gently with hers. "You did this, you know," she said. "All of it. Started with a napkin." Yull considered this with great seriousness. "I know," he said. "I'm very good at my job." "And what job is that?" "Finding people who make Daddy smile right." He looked up at her, entirely earnest, entirely without irony. "You're stuck with us now. Officially." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Jacaira said, and meant every word of it. Across the dance floor, Wontae watched them both. His son and his wife, heads bent together, laughing at something he couldn't hear, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that the walls he'd spent a lifetime building had finally, gently, come down for good. 1 year later, the hillside estate had a new sound running through it. Smaller, higher, entirely new. The particular delighted shriek of a baby girl who had recently discovered she could laugh on command simply by watching her older brother make faces. Her name was Arya, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's stillness, though the stillness rarely lasted long once Yul was in the room. "She likes me best," Yul announced, for perhaps the 100th time that week, lying on his stomach on the nursery floor in soft gray loungewear, making increasingly ridiculous faces at his baby sister, who shrieked with laughter at each new one. "She likes everyone," Jacaira said from the doorway, arms crossed, watching them both with the particular ache of happiness that still, some mornings, caught her off guard. She wore a simple cream knit set, soft and unstructured, her raven hair loose and slightly tousled, the wardrobe of a woman who had, somewhere in the last year, learned to be comfortable as well as elegant. "But I understand why you'd think that. I'm her favorite," Yul insisted, entirely undeterred, scooping one of Arya's small hands into his own with a gentleness that still, occasionally, made Jacaira's chest tighten unexpectedly. "I taught her to laugh." "You did not teach a baby to laugh, Yul." "I did. I have proof." He turned to his sister with great ceremony. "Arya, do the thing." Arya, on cue or simply by happy coincidence, laughed again, and Yul turned back to Jacaira with the smug satisfaction of a man who had just won an argument he'd manufactured entirely himself. "See?" Jacaira laughed, crossing the room to scoop her daughter up, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head, Arya's small fist immediately closing around a lock of her mother's dark hair. Wontae found them there 20 minutes later, having finally escaped a call that had run longer than he'd promised. He'd shed his suit jacket somewhere between the study and the nursery, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, the particular unwinding that only happened once he crossed the threshold into this part of the house, the part that had never, not once in 8 years, belonged to the version of him the rest of the world knew. "Sorry," he said, leaning against the doorframe, watching his family with an expression he still hadn't fully learned to hide, even after a year of marriage. "That took longer than it should have." "Sukjin again?" Jacaira asked, adjusting Arya against her hip. "Sukjin again." Wontae crossed the room, pressing a kiss to Jacaira's temple, then to his daughter's head, then reaching down to ruffle Yul's hair, who ducked away from it with practiced, affectionate protest. "He's stopped asking me to reconsider you, for the record. He's moved on to asking whether we're planning a third." "Tell him to mind his own board meetings," Jacaira said, and Wontae laughed, the easy, unguarded laugh that had once been so rare, now woven so thoroughly through the fabric of their days that Jacaira sometimes forgot it had ever been rare at all. That evening, after Arya had been settled and Yul had negotiated an extra 15 minutes of reading time with the skill of a man twice his age, Jacaira found the old drawing where it still lived, no longer tucked into the corner of an office desk, but framed now, hung in the hallway outside the nursery, 3 small figures beneath a golden sun, for uneven words above them, "My family at dinner." She was still looking at it when Yul appeared beside her, in soft pajamas, having apparently talked his way out of bed one more time under the guise of checking on Arya. "You still have it," he said, pleased, studying his own year-old artwork with the critical eye of an artist revisiting early work. "Of course I still have it. It started everything." Yul considered the drawing for a long moment, head tilted. "It's missing someone now," he said finally, matter of fact, already turning to head back toward his room. "I should probably fix that." Jacaira watched him go, smiling, and didn't think much more of it until 3 days later, when a new piece of paper appeared, carefully taped beside the original, 4 figures now instead of 3, beneath the same golden sun, a small figure with dark curly hair added at the end of the row, and above them in the same uneven, determined handwriting, slightly steadier now than it had been a year ago. "My family. All of us." Wontae found her there that evening, standing in the hallway, one hand pressed lightly to her chest, tears gathered but not fallen, looking between the 2 drawings, the one that had started everything, and the one that finished it. "He didn't tell me he was making a new one," Wontae said softly, coming to stand beside her, his arm settling naturally around her waist, the way it had 100 times this year and somehow never once felt ordinary. "He didn't tell me either." Jacaira leaned into him, watching the drawings, the golden suns, The careful loops of dark hair the 7-year-old had once spent so much effort getting right, now matched by a smaller, messier version beside it. He just decided the family wasn't finished yet. Same as always. That does seem to be his particular talent, Wontae murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Deciding things are family before the rest of us catch up. Down the hall, faint and muffled through a closed door, they could hear Yul narrating something to his sleeping sister in the low, serious voice of a boy explaining the world to someone he decided unequivocally was his responsibility to protect. Jasaira closed her eyes, leaning into her husband, into the quiet warmth of a hallway lined with 2 drawings and everything they had come to mean. A fortress built not to keep people out anymore, but to hold, carefully, everyone who had finally been let in. All of us, she repeated softly, echoing the words on the wall. All of us, Wontae agreed, and for the first time in a life built on walls and silence and careful, guarded distances, the words felt less like a promise still being kept, and more like a simple, settled fact. This has been Black Silk Stories, the home of Afro-Korean stories that hit different. Thank you for staying with this one from a folded napkin to a family of 4. If this story moved you, let us know below, like this video and subscribe because this is far from the last family we're building together. See you in the next one.